All right, little sub update here. Let's get into a little bit more detail. So I have a system that I started developing years ago. Um, the root desire originally was I love the TSR Marvel 4-color chart resolution mechanic. You might find that surprising. If you follow this channel, you know I have a really almost nasty simulation strain inside of me. And yet I thought the simplicity of that system was beautiful, right? Where you had the edge at the top that said, you're doing this kind of roll, this is what white, green, yellow, and red means. Then you have the chart with the different stats going across and the numeric results going, or the dice results going down on the side, and then each cell in there was colored white, green, yellow, or red. I thought the simplicity of that was beautiful. Um, it was varied. That wasn't just a hit or a miss, and yeah. But there were many things I did not like about the Marvel TSR Marvel system. One of which was the idea that you're just rolling on your stat. Essentially, in my opinion, everything is opposed, whether it's actively opposed by another character with a particular stat or skill, or generically opposed, as in like there's a difficulty. There's a difficulty in shooting a rifle 400 yards and hitting a single sitting still target of X size. There is a difficulty in climbing a red brick wall 20 feet without gear. Like you know, so everything is opposed in my perception. That doesn't mean that every system I ever play has to have opposed mechanics, but I really didn't like the idea that basically if you had a good fighter versus a good fighter, it's a slugfest, right? Because if they have really good stats, then they just roll green, yellow, or red all the time. They rarely ever roll white. And it's like, aren't you going to take, but then again, that's also because you actually had to take an action to be defensive instead of just simply being defensive. Having defense rolled into your fighting. Anyways, so I made a 5-color chart. I included black, which was at the lowest results. Those were for critical fumbles. Some people don't like critical fumbles, and since then, by the way, I have decided to make that an optional part of the mechanics. So if you don't want to run it, a black is the same as a white. It's just a miss or other kind of basic failure. So to start off with that, it was going to be point-based. Character creation and development going on the same scale. I think that's always important. But here's the real kicker. It was to be universal generic, right? So universal, fantasy, science fiction, modern, space, whatever, generic without setting. So you just got the mechanics and you put what you want into it. Also, it was supposed to be extendable, right? Like I wasn't going to create, especially since it was going to be universal, I wasn't going to create everything. I was going to lay down a good, solid framework and show you how I did it, and then say, so this is how you would go and do. It's design. I wanted it to not be terribly complicated, because if it's terribly complicated, then you start offsetting the advantage you got from the simplistic 4C resolution. And I looked at the stuff I was making, like skills and spells or whatever, powers, and I looked at it and said, this has gotten out of control. This is way too thick. It is not easy to play. And I put it aside. That was push 1. So this is, did I say that at the beginning? This is my 3-push system. I called it three pushes, 2 pushes in my update video. In the interim between the first and second push of this system, I had a conversation on the role-playing side of Board Game Geek. Maybe I'll link that down below. It was about whether or not mechanics were tied to settings, vice versa. And I came into that conversation being a universalist, right? I thought good mechanics are good mechanics. It doesn't really matter. And I think I left that conversation being a hesitant universalist, but after stewing on it for some time, I was no longer a universalist. I agreed with the no mechanics are tied to settings. I mean, not every mechanic, but a good number. So when I did return the system, I thought, oh, so maybe this is one of the ways I can make it simpler. I can get back to the level of rule intensity and crunch that I wanted, was to not make it universal, right? Sure, I think this idea could work for science fiction, and I think it could work for fantasy, and I think it could work for superheroes or Western or whatever. But let's make them specific. Let's make them distinct, right? It could always be a thing like if you wanted to run all these systems together, you could, and you could hodgepodge it together yourself as a GM, but I wasn't going to write it that way. I thought this is probably a good way to get rid of this mess. And so I started again, I reinvestigated some of the numbers and stuff that I had started sketching out abilities and powers and stuff like that. I didn't get super far. Actually, I don't think I ever got to the part where I was actually making powers or abilities. I was going with superhero first as a genre, I think. When I just simply down. It wasn't a lack of interest. It was a much of, for things for me, it's almost never a lack of interest as much as like, ooh, pretty thing over there. And I get more interested in doing something over there. I haven't even been streaming as much because I've been playing the crap out of South Park Stick of Truth. I flit. It's kind of annoying, but I do. So it's kind of undergoing its third push now, but that's all. Like I said in the October update video, it's all mental, and I haven't gotten to the point where I want to actually spend some time and write some things down. But here's the thing: I've asked around. You guys have heard me. I've asked around about systems that I think would work, that you all would think would work well to run a Darkest Dungeon game in. Like if you're familiar with the video game Darkest Dungeon, I think it is one of the best games to be released in the last 5 years. Blades in the Dark was the most common suggestion, and I did a little investigating of Blades in the Dark, and I was like, this is way too narrative of a system. While the design point that the folks behind Darkest Dungeon had was amazing, and it's one of the things I do want to include, which is what happens to the emotions and psyche of a person who goes and sees all these horrible things and kills all these things and gets attacked by all these things and goes delving dungeons. What's the emotional trauma that person's going to suffer? Well, that question in itself is a great, kind of leans towards a narrative system. Darkest Dungeon itself was also extremely tactical. I mean, you had to look at those numbers and think through and make some really good decisions to be successful. I still haven't beaten the game because I'm not successful at level 5. Like whatever processing and logic I'm doing is flawed at level 5. It might have been good enough for below that, but not at level 5. So I did not go with Blades in the Dark. And one of the things that was part of the system that I was developing, which was basically, I'll go ahead and talk about this. This was both present in push 1 and still in push 2, was the idea of, I love criticals, but some people, I have heard some complaint, like if you look at Rollmaster, about like, well, but it describes it and it really kind of like locks you down as to what we're doing. Okay, how about if it's not locked down? How about if I simply say, if you got into this point in damage, take a critical, right? Like, so basically I had kind of a line chart, almost like old Shadowrun, I think, a line, a bunch of boxes for your hit points, um, and some of them were colored differently, saying when you get down to here, you and the GM, authority heavier on the GM, of course, because that's who I am. That's my gaming style and my philosophy of role playing. The GM, with the help of the player, comes up with a critical, right? Like, and the healthier on the scale, the less that it has to be severe. But you get down on the scale and it's more severe. But I'd also had like a, a an exhaustion track available. I was gonna do optional magic points, but clearly, like sanity, one of them could have been sanity, and I was like, oh, so maybe it's that system that I've been working on, that 5C system, that might be the best for this game. Okay. So I thought about, I reconsidered some things like, hey, am I going to keep the archetype development? What about the professions? Like the classes, if you would, in Darkest Dungeon. What are we going to do with that? Interestingly enough, the thing that attracted me to this idea of using this system, this 5C system, to do a Darkest Dungeon implementation, I've actually thrown it out. I think, excuse me, I think it would just work better. It's just some hard cold numbers and effects like bleeding, and that works. Because if I want to get the feel, some of the feel in Darkest Dungeon is making those tactical mistakes, and there has to be enough certainty in order to make good tactical decisions. Like, right, the ability, if everything's just hugely random, tactics don't actually really play a part because you can't plan. That's going to be one of the interesting things in the design, is just to try to figure out if I can recreate the same idea of randomness so that things don't always go right, and enough predictability to have a tactical. But that's where it's at. Like, I've thought through, like, there will be professions. There's actually still going to be levels, even though it's also point based. So basically, it's going to be one of those things where you spend points to improve abilities or improve stats or whatever, and keep track of how many points in total you have ever spent, and you will achieve levels at certain points. Like, the levels are going to be responsible for like the total number of hit points and some like saves, some save strengths, save benefits, stuff like that. That's about it. And then the skills, the moves that you learn will be improved in the stats. The stats will end up eating into moves and skills and stuff like that. And then the town will be sort of managed through your missions, sort of in a mutant year zero sort of way, right? So you've done this, so now that opens up this, or you've done this, and now these more people show up. More people are feeling safe enough to start families or whatever. But I'm to the point where I really kind of need to sit down and like write up what some abilities would be like, what some classes would be like, some of the skills and abilities would be like, how would we manage the town. And if I go far enough with this idea, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like um, one or two, probably I should probably say two. Well, let's give it the lowest number, 1 to 3 example towns with types of areas that come off of them, and then like say cove. Say I build an ocean line, an ocean or just large water, like maybe a Great Lakes, shore town, and so there's a pier, and there's water caves, and there's enemy, foulness in the water that's coming up on land. So create storyline for going out there, because I find, because my initial push would be that the precise like settings of the maps are not going to be terribly important, right? They don't have to be super simulationist. They just need to be essentially grid maps for people that have combat. And I have two different ideas about how to run light, because light was pretty important in Darkest Dungeon. I'm going to test the lowest one first, and if everything runs smoothly with that, then I'll try the complicated one. And if the complicated one works but is too complicated, then I may just include it in the rules as like an optional rule set. But I'm at the point where I need to write down some ideas and see if this is fleshing out, right? See if actually getting Darkest Dungeon to paper to something that's going to be played out in a grid, because that changes things, right? Darkest Dungeon's a single-dimensional game. You get your line of 4 guys on your side and a line of 4 bad guys on their side. And, you know, like ranges of combat was like, which position does it hit and which position do you have to be in to do it? Make it 2-dimensional grid of an overview of a room. That kind of changes things, right? Like, you know, if you had some kind of long spear attack could go through the first 2 or 3 enemies in a line, what does that look like if enemies may be, you know, right in front of you, off to the left, and then over there to the right, you know, but all within 3 hexes of you or squares of you, but not all in a line. You know what I'm saying? So, anyways, this video is going on long enough. Now we'll go make my other videos. Later.